Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, TJ Mabardi. Today we are going to be breaking down the news that Jim Harbaugh has been signed to the LA Chargers as their next head coach. So we'll be talking about the implications as far as the Chargers and them going forward, how this will affect Justin Herbert, their franchise quarterback. In the second segment of the show, we are going to be talking about the implications of Harbaugh leaving college football after winning a national championship just last season. And now we have two of the four playoff teams from last year now with a new head coach heading into the next season. The Michigan actually hasn't quite yet hired a head coach, so we'll be talking about some candidates there. In the latter half of the show, we will be talking some NBA. First off, with the Phoenix Suns, who have just won their seventh straight game, going to be asking the question, have they turned the corner after a lackluster start? And then to end off the show, I will be giving my NBA Midseason awards for all of the traditional NBA awards, MVP, Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, stuff like that. But before we get into the show, just want to remind you all to like and follow. And for any of our live viewers that have questions, please remember to use the link down scrolling at the ticker that is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip to help make this show interactive and to help get your questions the priority they deserve. So starting this off here with Jim Harbaugh and the Los Angeles Chargers. So this deal came in last night. Michigan, before this all played out, Michigan had offered Harbaugh a contract to make him the highest paid coach in college football. If you know anything about college football, there is a lot of money for head coaches in that type of league. So this was a lot of money that Harbaugh passed up on to make the jump back to the NFL. For those of you who aren't aware, Harbaugh was with the San Francisco 49ers early in the 2010s, took the 49ers to a Super Bowl, lost, actually, interestingly enough, to his brother in that Super Bowl before going back to the college level and coaching Michigan to their national championship. So Schefter tweeted that his focus was more so on the NFL. He wants to win a Super Bowl. He has a little bit of unfinished business there, and that he thinks that specifically in the NFL, the Chargers give him the best chance to win the Super Bowl. Now, of course, the Chargers have their franchise quarterback already set in place in Justin Herbert, who was drafted in 2019. Fairly certain it was 2019. I feel confident about that, unless it was 20. But I do think that this is a really nice fit between the Chargers and Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh. I think that this all works out. Harbaugh has had a pretty significant amount of success in his coaching history, helping to elevate quarterback play. Now, I know his first few years at Michigan sort of came without a real elite quarterback option, but if you go back to his 49ers role, he helped elevate the last year of Alex Smith and then Colin Kaepernick. I know that, the public perception of him is sort of split in different ways, but he was legitimately a dangerous weapon in the NFL for those few seasons there. One of, I wouldn't say the first of the mobile quarterback era, but he took that dual threat, and I do think that he was sort of an important stepping stone to sort of helping NFL teams understand just how valuable a dual threat quarterback can be. Now, for the Chargers here, unfortunately for them, it isn't just as simple as having a good coach and having a good quarterback, because there are still a handful of other obstacles that are in the way for the Chargers here. first and foremost, it is the division. Now, you're in the same division with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. That is a given that is going to be an obstacle for the foreseeable future. I think that if you look around the division as well, you now have the Broncos who, yes, did not make the playoffs once again, but sort of seem to be buying into the Sean Payton philosophy and the culture that he's building there. And Sean Payton is going to go down as a Hall of Fame coach, in my opinion. And I think that there was definitely a disconnect between him and Russell Wilson this season. Russell Wilson, I don't think that he is the Russell Wilson that we've seen in the past when he was taking the Seahawks to the Super Bowls. I think that it's a tough situation because it's one of those times where what was he supposed to not take the enormous contract that the Broncos gave to him when they traded for him? He is still a fine quarterback in my opinion, but obviously for that amount of money and the level of production that he is capable of putting out on a weekly basis, they're just not equivalent at this point anymore. So I know that there are hard feelings for Russell Wilson and his tenure in Denver. I expect them to be parting ways one way or another this offseason, and we'll see what the Broncos are continuing to build. The Raiders just brought back Antonio Pierce, their interim coach from this season after they fired McDaniels, and he was very well endorsed by all of the Raiders players, specifically Max Crosby, really the leader of that defense and the team as a whole. So we'll see with the Raiders. I mean, that's a franchise where you never totally know what you're going to get from them, I feel like, but it is not an easy division to be a part of right now, and that is something that sort of hurts, especially considering the current state of the Chargers roster. They are a little bit on the age side, not super old, but especially with their highest paid players, they are on the latter halves of their career. And on that note, they have 4 players specifically that make up 56.82% of their salary for the upcoming season. Now, we'll see what happens, obviously, with the salary cap jump and all of that, but this is just off of the numbers as it currently stands. These 4 players make up over half of their payroll. That is Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. The youngest of the group is Joey Bosa. All the rest will be just about turning 30 going into next year, and that's a lot. Each of them make up over 10% of their salary cap, and this doesn't even include Justin Herbert, who is still finishing out his rookie contract, his contract that they just extended him for the next season. It was it is going to be $6 million for this season. It's going to jump to $15 million, $24 million, $36 million, and $47 million. So it's not going to get any easier. And we sort of had this conversation a little bit with the Bills earlier this week and Josh Allen's contract that is about to take a jump. This happens. It's possible to maneuver around it. Just look at the Chiefs. Mahomes takes up over 20% of their salary, and yet they are in a conference championship game that you're talking about Mahomes, a future Hall of Famer. So I think that a lot of people do view Herbert as at least potential to be a really great franchise guy. I know that I myself do. I think that the Brandon Staley experiment in the Chargers organization was, yes, they made the playoffs, but I would sort of consider it a failure considering just how bad that defense was after hiring a defensive-minded coach. Now, obviously, head coach take on a little bit of different roles when you get promoted to the full head coach. It's not like he was solely responsible for the defense, but that was his background, and there just seemed to be a complete inability for that group to fully lock in, and it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean, they gave Khalil Mack this massive contract a couple years ago. They paid J.C. Jackson a ton of money coming off of his all-pro season with the Patriots. He was a complete failure there. So they've tried to throw money at some of these problems, but it had not worked up to the point. I think that it was more than overdue for the Chargers to look in a different way, different direction than Staley. And I think that Harbaugh should be a nice addition to the group. So they are going to have money issues. According to Pro Football Focus, they are 30th in maximum available salary cap room for next season, so that's not great. They, like the Bills, who are also in a little bit of financial trouble, are going to need to hit on draft picks. Now, the Chargers have a top 6 pick in this upcoming draft, so they'll have a chance to go out and get a playmaker. I'm curious what direction they're going to go. I'm sure as we get closer to the time, we will be discussing that on this show. But they do have some opportunities this year to sort of help retool, help out Herbert, help Harbaugh, take advantage of a very loaded skill position draft class that maybe he finds the type of players that will help suit his system the best. As for Harbaugh here and his decision to come to the Chargers, it was pointed out that Harbaugh actually finished up his career with the Chargers, the then San Diego Chargers, but he is familiar with the ownership family and he felt comfortable about the level of understanding between him and the group, especially so considering the fact that he had initially had an interview planned with the Atlanta Falcons and the Chargers buckled down and threw everything at him to make sure that he would not leave the area, he would not go take that interview, and that he would agree to be their next head coach. So definitely a very strong level of want from the organizational standpoint, which I'm sure helps Harbaugh, who, maybe a little bit of a cliche, but he has been very big himself on faith and faith, football, and family, and the amount of loyalty between all of that. I think that was somewhat rewarded in this instance where he chooses to go to the Chargers, who are begging is maybe the wrong word, but throwing themselves at Harbaugh to at least let him know that you are very much wanted here. We believe you are the guy, and we are willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So I think that it was rumored to be the case for a good while, and it finally comes to fruition. Just sort of final thoughts here. Sort of mentioned the Harbaugh ability to help quarterbacks develop some. I think that we saw it this past season with J.J. McCarthy, who, in my opinion, is a very tough profile to sort of scout, given the circumstance he was in and such a run-heavy Michigan offense. Really wasn't asked to do all too much. If you look back to that Penn State game where they ran the ball 20-plus times straight to end the game. And I think that, just whether or not you believe McCarthy is a guy, I think that Harbaugh helped to put him in the best situation possible to succeed this season. And we saw last year, despite having Austin Eckler, and yes, he was dealing with some injuries, that offense could not run the ball. They've thrown money at their offensive line before. Corey Linsley, they brought in a handful of years ago, but he's sort of getting up there in age as well. They had some injuries on that front line. They were 25th in rush yards per game. I think that Harbaugh is going to be able to help build up a system around Justin Herbert to help him succeed the most. So that is Harbaugh on the Chargers. Now the flip side of this is what happens with Michigan and college football as a whole now that he is gone. We will be getting to that when we come back on the other side of the break. Stick around.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just wrapped up talking about the Chargers' decision to hire Jim Harbaugh as their next head coach. Now, on the flip side of that, that means there is a vacancy at coach with one of the most premier college football programs in the nation. So next we're going to be talking about what does Harbaugh's departure mean for college football across the nation. And I think that for starters, you have to look at the Big Ten here, because if you are talking about Michigan football, you're talking about Ohio State football as well. The two just go hand in hand. We obviously know how much weight there is around those matchups specifically. And, you know, you even look at Harbaugh's stint here with Michigan. He won no less than 8 games through each season with Michigan in full years, of course, that is, not counting the 2020 COVID season. But at least 8 wins every year while he was there. But people were calling for his job very early because of the inability to beat Ohio State. He lost his first 5 matchups there, and as a result, a lot of people were unsatisfied with the job he was doing there just because there is that much baggage that comes with that matchup alone. And really, if you look at Michigan versus Ohio State for the greater part of the 2000s, it has been Ohio State sort of on top, at least in the college football playoff era. And Michigan and Harbaugh sort of had these expectations that they were supposed to be better than that, even though recent history would sort of say that that wasn't the case. And at the time, Urban Meyer was at Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken, because obviously I'm trying to remember back on the timeline specifically of when Urban Meyer was being dismissed from Ohio State. It was during the 2018 season. I know that Ryan Day ended up taking over as acting head coach before being named full-time head coach in that year. So, if I'm not mistaken, Harbaugh never beat Urban Meyer during his tenure there at Michigan in those one-on-one matchups. It was only when Ryan Day came, and Day won the first couple, but it was only then that Michigan was able to sort of get that one up on Ohio State. So, all of this to be said, if Harbaugh was succeeding as much as he was, and his job was on the line, what does that mean for Ryan Day going forward? Because he, like Harbaugh, has now had some good performances in the college football playoffs. He's had some good teams, really successful seasons, but coming off of 3 straight losses in this matchup is going to have, for sure, the Ohio State boosters and some of the fan base sort of chattering about, does he need to go? Is he the problem? And while I don't think that's totally fair, that is just the sort of cycle that goes on with this specific matchup. So I think that Ryan Day has a ton of pressure under him now to win this, because if you're going to come out and you're going to lose to whoever this next head coach is for Michigan, I think that he could maybe be seeing his way out if he doesn't win these matchups, especially this upcoming year. I think that Penn State also has a lot of pressure under them because they've been a good program the past couple years, but their only 4 losses have come to Ohio State and to Michigan. So Penn State's sort of the little brother in this situation. It's Michigan and it's Ohio State. Those are the big two. Penn State sort of floats around this area where we know they can be a good program, but they don't really have the respect of those other two until they earn it themselves. And they just have not at this point. They are 14-0, I believe, against every other team other than Ohio State and Michigan during the course of the past 2 seasons. They were thought to have a quarterback in Drew Aller. He had a little bit of a disappointing season in a lot of people's eyes, in my eyes at least. And, you know, it's only going to get more difficult for them and for Ohio State as well. But that sort of brings me into this next part of the conversation where the Big Ten is expanding. They are adding in some new teams following the league realignment and the loss of the Pac-12. USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington will all be joining the conference. So it will be just that much more contested in these years to come. So before I fully get into what is this going to look like across the league and across college football as a whole, hitting on some candidates for the next Michigan head coach. I think that the favorite at this point should be Sharon Moore. He was the offensive coordinator with Michigan for the past few seasons. He coached the team as somewhat of the acting head coach when Harbaugh was dealing with his in-season suspension. He was a finalist for the Top Assistant in the Nation award in the past, so he has a lot of credentials behind him. He's familiar with the locker room and with the program. I think that he makes the most sense for the position. If you are going to be any sort of critical, I think that, not even critical necessarily, but he's just 37 years old. I feel like, and I don't have any statistics to back this up, I feel like college football isn't quite on the same developmental path as the NFL is. The NFL has been much more prone to hiring younger coaches in recent history. College football, I think, is maybe just a step behind, and maybe that's just a matter of the top coaches in college football have all been a little bit older. So we're still sort of waiting for this new young guard to fully kick in. But if there were any concern, it would potentially be that. In my opinion, I think that we're talking about college football here, where all of the athletes are no older really than 23 years old. They're early 20s, unless, obviously it was prolonged a little bit with the COVID year and the red shirts that you had, especially some of the quarterback prospects from this year, reaching up to that 24, 25 years old. But in general, these are young kids as it is. I don't think that that's a real concern for me. I would endorse Sharon Moore to be Michigan's replacement as head coach, but I obviously have no say in this. So he is one candidate for it. I think that it becomes especially so considering that, the coaching carousel has taken place a lot already as far as college coaches here, because there was this holding out of Harbaugh. Is he going to come back, or is he going to make the leap to the NFL? And while I think that a lot of us knew that he was going to be looking for an NFL job, Michigan still had hope for themselves that they were going to be able to retain Harbaugh, because why wouldn't they? You sort of, at that point, have to do what you at least can to try and convince him to stay. He just led you to a college football playoff national championship. So it makes sense why they were hesitant. And like, if they had any sort of a chance, they would have been killed if they were actively trying to look for that next head coach while also asking Harbaugh to stay, which is another reason why I think that more makes sense for them. But if they were to look outside of the building, I think that you have a couple examples. You have Kansas's head coach Lance Leipold. He really has turned around this Kansas program that was 0-9 in the season going into when he took over for them. He's brought them to back-to-back bowl appearances. He's had them ranked in each of the past 2 seasons while they fell out 2 years ago. They did finish in the top 25 this year at 23. So Kansas football has never really been a real prominent program, but Leipold has done pretty good work in these past couple seasons to get his name in consideration for a position like this. And then the other sort of realistic, possibly, other head coaching name would be Minnesota's PJ Fleck. Now, Fleck's stock is a little bit down this year because Minnesota wasn't quite as good as they've been in the past. They were 6-7 this season, and in the past, he has been a lot better. He's led them to at least 9 wins in 3 of the past 4 full seasons, again, excluding that 2020 COVID-shortened season. So, Fleck has had success in the past. Again, this maybe would be a weird time for him to get the head coaching job, but I think that his overall body of work is pretty impressive. So, I don't think that it would be a disaster hire in any sorts. And then really outside of that, again, because we've seen so many of these hot younger guys already commit to coaching elsewhere, there are a couple home run swing names that you can throw out for this. I know that a couple of these names were linked to Alabama and maybe had some Alabama history within their coaching and playing career, but Dabo for Clemson, I mean, I think that after all of this preaching about homegrown and don't leave in the transfer portal, you'll get your chances, we're not going to bring other guys in the transfer portal, I think that it would be a surprise if he then turned and left. Brian Kelly for LSU, I think that, again, a newer hire for LSU, got a big contract. He just lost his quarterback, he and his number 1 receiver. He's leader on the defense as well with Perkins. So I think Perkins is declared. Don't quote me on that, but there's going to be a lot of turnover with LSU this year. I think that if there were sort of a chance to move on to a program like Michigan, now LSU is obviously no slouch either, but these names I'm throwing out here are really just for the sake of fun talking points, but also just the fact that Michigan is a very significant brand within the college football world. Last name I had down was Mike Norvell with Florida State. I think that he probably feels like there's unfinished business there, coming off of their undefeated season this past year and still being left out of the college football playoffs, but loses Jordan Travis, that leader. If he feels like there's maybe not quite as much room to grow in that conference, in the ACC, and that maybe upgrading to a Big Ten would help get him some more recognition, I think that there's an argument for it. But again, I think these are more so just sort of home run names that there's probably not an extreme likelihood of it happening, but I just thought that, again, I'd name some of these names for the sake of it, because right now the focus within Michigan has been keeping Harbaugh. Now that that's no longer on the table, they are sure to be kicking the tires on some of these names, or at least try to. So that is all the time we have right now on the Harbaugh effect on college football. On the next segment, we are going to be transitioning to some NBA, where last night we continued on with this NBA Rivals Week, and we got a dominant performance from the Phoenix Suns, who seem to be really coming along strong. So we are going to be asking the question whether or not they've turned the corner when we come back on the other side. Please stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just sort of wrapped up thoughts on Jim Harbaugh's departure from Michigan, and now we are going to be moving on to the NBA, where last night the Phoenix Suns had a dominant win against their rivals, the Dallas Mavericks. They were trailing 16 in the second quarter, but they turned it on and came back for a 132-109 win. Early on in that game, Luka was just carving up the Suns defense. He really is. I mean, it's not breaking any news saying he's incredible, but he was a monster. Now, there was no Kyrie for the Mavericks last night, so the Suns started sending tons of pressure at Luka. Eventually, he slowed down a little bit, and that offense did as a whole. If you know about the Mavericks this year, they haven't really been the type of team to be able to win off of their defense alone. So in comes the Suns, and they just poured it on in that third quarter. Just ridiculous stuff. Devin Booker specifically was the story of this game specifically. If you look at the third quarter stats alone, Devin Booker outscored the Mavericks as a whole 22-20. He made more field goals than the Mavericks did. He had 9 shots in the quarter. The Mavericks only hit 8. The Suns shot as a whole 18 for 21 in the quarter. I don't think I've seen anything like that. It was ridiculous. And again, Mavericks not a great defensive team, but I do think that the way that they were getting these buckets, you know, they at that point, the Mavericks were trying to, especially as Devin Booker was heating up, they tried to send extra pressure. Anytime that Booker was getting a screen, they were blitzing him. And in those moments, I think that we get to see the maturity level that Booker has developed over the course of the past couple seasons. The decision-making is just on par. And especially with this team, when you have these other very talented players, it is very dangerous for them, where you have good decision makers, you have good shot makers like Bradley Beal and company. You can't leave Grayson Allen open because he's been incredible this year. So as a whole, a masterful performance by the Suns. They've now won 7 straight games. And after a slow start to the year, they were sort of dealing with some mediocrity and a lot of injuries to their star players. They now find themselves late here in January as 26-18 and the 5 seed. Just a month ago, today is January 25th. On December 25th, they were sub 500. They were 14-15 after losing to none other than the Dallas Mavericks. So it has been a turning of the page for them. So asking the question here, have they rounded the corner? I think that in a lot of ways they have. They finally had their guys together. The true starting lineup of Booker, Beal, Grayson Allen, Kevin Durant, and Jusuf Nurkic, they have finally played the most amount of minutes out of any lineup that the Suns have put out there this year. And it is scary if you're a defense, because any one of, especially those main 3 shot creators between Beal, Durant, and Booker can get going. But there's no liabilities really. Nurkic has been huge on both ends for them. And just based off of the eye test alone, I think that he is one of the most active off-ball guys, offensively that is, in the league, just always setting screens, making the right plays. You saw very early in the year when him and Booker, before they had the whole ensemble of their star players, he was making big plays in crunch time. And, you know, in general, you probably don't want Nurkic to be the one on this roster making the crunch time decisions. But that being said, I think that there are worse substitutions for that. And you're talking about a big man here that is smart enough to be able to make these plays and not be a liability. Grayson Allen, I just mentioned him. He's been unbelievable this season. The only player in the NBA right now to be shooting 50, 40, 90. And not just that, he's almost shooting 50% from three. And it's not for lack of attempts. He's shooting 5.7 3-pointers per game. He's hitting 49% of those. That is ridiculous. Quickly on Nurkic, before I fully get off of him too, I think that it shouldn't come as a massive surprise in my opinion. I think that Nurkic once showed that he had a lot of potential and he was up and coming when he left Denver and was traded to the Portland Trail Blazers. He was sort of the third guy with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. I believe he was the starting center during their Western Conference Finals run. But really after that, it was an inability to stay healthy. He hasn't played 60 games in a season since 2019. And this year, he's been available, which has been huge for them. Played 42 out of 44 games so far for the Phoenix Suns. And he's been a very valuable player for them. So I think the Suns have rounded the corner here. I think that they are to be taken seriously going forward. Now, they are still a little bit top heavy, and in the case of injuries is where I would be a little bit nervous for them, for the reason of I like their role players. I like Eric Gordon. I like Josh Okogie, Drew Eubanks, Keita Bates-Diop, Chimezie Metu. They all look good enough in limited roles. But I do worry a little bit that if they're being forced to play starter minutes in a playoff series, I mean, we saw this with Okogie last year down the stretch. It's just not, it's not enough, really. There's not enough offensive firepower. These are all fine players, and why I think it also works with them is because you have these three elite shot creators that you can stagger their minutes some, and you can have somebody pretty much on the court at all times that can go get you a bucket, which I think helps to make them dangerous. It's just a matter of if they were to lose any one of these guys, and Beal and Durant specifically a little bit on the tail ends of their career, have both struggled with injuries in the past few seasons. I think that that's where you sort of get into a little bit murky territory there. But other than injuries, I think that the concern for me really would be not having a true point guard for crunch time possessions. Now, in the past couple of weeks, that has not mattered. As I mentioned, 7-game win streak, and they have a couple of those wins coming with some close games. They had a 22-point comeback against the Sacramento Kings a couple weeks ago, in which Durant was just absurd. He had 12-plus points in the last few minutes of that game as the Suns went on a 23-4 run to help close that out after, in the fourth quarter, being down 22 points. That was very impressive. He ends up drawing a foul, getting to the free throw line, and hitting both of those to help them win that game. And then he had an even crazier shot just on Monday playing against the Chicago Bulls, where it was back and forth between them. DeMar DeRozan, again, he's kind of frustrating for me as far as crunch time minutes. He's always going to get to his spot, but sometimes he's just so stuck in that I think he can be a little bit mistake prone. But this was a good DeRozan night as far as crunch time buckets go. He was hitting shots, and it came down to the Suns with the ball to end that game, and Kevin Durant hit, I think it went under the radar given how much attention it really got in the moment. He got to the free throw line elbow area, and it was a Patrick Williams covering him, jumped up with the contest, and Durant almost with his arms alone evaded the contest and did a little bit of like a double clutch to sort of veer off to the left around his contest, pull back up, and then hit the shot. I thought it was ridiculous. Kevin Durant, I know that he gets a lot of slack for the move to the Warriors in the first place, joining the team that you just blew a 3-1 lead to, and he hasn't quite been able to replicate the team success that he had since leaving there. But I think that that's because Kevin Durant, the player, is far better than Kevin Durant, the GM. He has sort of not done the best job of picking which players he wants to tie himself to in the past, but I do think that this Phoenix Suns opportunity is his best one since the Nets. I mean, the lack of assets that they had to give up for Beal in that trade, and Beal is not at his best, the All-NBA player that he was a few years ago, but he's still more than capable when he plays. I think that injuries has played to a huge part of it. Expectations in Washington his last few years were very low, and now as long as they're fully healthy, I think they're just about as good as any team in the West. Now, as far as how they match up, I worry a little bit defensively. I like their role players, but I don't think that they have a ton of point of attack defenders as far as the Los Angeles Clippers, who I know that a lot this year it has become the James Harden show with the ball in his hands. But really, when you think about it, they have a lot of guys that can create with the ball themselves. Obviously, Paul George. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard. I think that Terrence Mann has sort of gotten the short end of the stick. I think he's a good player, and he hasn't gelled perfectly probably with the James Harden system. So who knows, maybe he could even be traded, but I think that there was a reason why the Clippers said that Mann was not available in a James Harden trade to Philadelphia in the first place. So I think there's a lot of talent there. The Nuggets are obviously, they're just sort of at the point. I know that they've had games where they've sort of coasted a little bit. Still some weird stuff with them on the road during the regular season. They're sub 500 the past 2 seasons on the road. But, you know, we saw how that played out in the playoffs. I feel like there's just a certain level of, you can't worry too much about the Nuggets until it gets to the playoffs and we start to see them fall apart. Now, yes, they're probably missing some Bruce Brown minutes, but I think that some of the young talent that they have, Peyton Watson in his second season, is playing really well. I think that Christian Brown has improved. You remember, he wasn't much of a factor at all for a lot of their season, then obviously really showed out in the finals for them. And, you know, they drafted 3 rookies this year, and, you know, none of them have gotten a ton of playing time, but I think that Julian Strawther out of Gonzaga has played some good minutes for them when he has been on the court. So all this to be said, I think that, and that's not even mentioning the top 2 teams in the conference that we will be getting to a little bit in this upcoming mid-season awards segment after the break. But I think that the Suns are legit. I think that teams should be scared of them. And again, I know that it comes down to health, but if all of their guys are playing, I think that they are an incredibly hard matchup for any team to match up against defensively. So that is all we have on the Suns. We're going to be sticking with the NBA as I wrap up the show talking about my mid-season NBA awards. We will get to that on the other side of the break. Stick with us. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today we have talked about Jim Harbaugh's decision to come to an agreement with the LA Chargers as their head coach. We just wrapped up a segment on the Phoenix Suns, and now that we are halfway through the NBA season, every team has played at least half of their games of the 2023-24 season. I will be handing out my NBA Midseason awards. I am going to start this with the MVP award, and I don't think that there is a ton of debate given just where we are today in the season. And that is Joel Embiid. And I am a Celtics fan, so I've never been the biggest Embiid guy. I'm not a Sixers fan, but what he is doing is truly historic. It is incredible, the run that he has been on here offensively, scoring 21 straight games with 30 or more points. And I think that we've seen this year that after James Harden was traded to start off this season, Joel Embiid was sort of handed the keys to become the full offense. James Harden calls himself the system. This is the system of Joel Embiid, and it is dominating so far this season. He's averaging 36.1 points per game on 54% from the field, and he's even shooting 36% from three, so adding that little bit of extra danger to his repertoire, it just becomes that much harder to guard him when he's able to space out the floor. We've seen what he can do in the mid-range. He's been lethal there, hitting the shots, and because he's hitting the shots, he's forcing defenders to step up on him and guard him, in which a lot of the time he uses that to his advantage, especially against these smaller defenders where he can bait them into fouls, and that's where he gets a lot of his job done, averaging over 12 free throw attempts per game, and he is very good at knocking those down as well. So he has just been a one-man wrecking crew on offense, and it's not just his scoring is the thing. He assists on over 32% of his teammates' made shots. That is in the 98th percentile of all big men across the league. If I had a complaint with him early in his career, it was that a lot of turnovers off of double teams, and that's sort of how the Joel Embiid system was slowed down come the postseason. You've seen year in, year out, he's improved at that, and as a result, it just leads to such better offense, and I wouldn't say flawless, but near flawless from an as good as you can do as an individual performer in the NBA. The one glaring issue for Joel Embiid as far as locking up this MVP, and also I do want to point out with this award and with all awards, this happens every year where we think somebody's a lock. 41 games is a lot of time for things to change. So none of these are set in stone. These are just where we stand today. And as far as Joel Embiid, you could be asking yourself, well, how could it be anybody but Embiid winning the MVP? That would be because of games played. The NBA implemented a rule this season in which players have to play in at least 65 games to be eligible for all NBA awards as well as all NBA teams. And right now, as it currently stands, Joel Embiid is not on pace to reach that 65-game threshold. He has played in 32 out of 42 games for the 76ers this season. In an 82-game season, that paces out to be 62 and a half. We can call it 63 games for the sake of it, but that would make him ineligible for all of these recognitions. A lot of people have a problem with the rule here about whether or not this should be in place. Me personally, I think that for the MVP award, it is fair. And for the record, only one player in NBA history has won MVP with playing less than 65 games across an 82-game season. That was Bill Walton in 1978. So it's not like this is a crazy, turning around the entire league, the entire history of the award thing. This has been the case for the majority of the NBA's existence in the 82-game season. So I don't have a problem with it for that. I think that if Joel Embiid plays 64 games and he's averaging the exact same stat line that he does, for him to not make any sort of an All-NBA team, I think that would be crazy. So I think that there should be a little more leniency when it comes to that, but ultimately I don't have the biggest problem in the world with setting that mark for the MVP award. If he doesn't, I think that, and if you were to disqualify him, because technically 65 games is 79% of the season, Joel Embiid has played in 76% of his team's games this year. So if you want to disqualify him, my pick would be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think that he is having a phenomenal season as well. Should be on his way to another All-NBA first-team selection. He's the best player on the number one team in the Western Conference. So I think that would be the next logical pick for MVP. Rookie of the Year. Now, I know it can be a little contested on the internet as far as who should be the Rookie of the Year, and it depends on what scope you look at the NBA Rookie of the Year award through. It's between Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren. The Spurs are really bad, but the Rookie of the Year award has never taken winning into account, and that's why I have Victor Wembanyama as the Rookie of the Year. The only time that I can really remember this winning argument being so prominent was in the 2017 and 18 season between Ben Simmons and Donovan Mitchell, where Mitchell was the number one scorer. He was the entire offensive identity, really, of the Utah Jazz as they went on to win 48 games, and his team was the 5 seed in a Western Conference where at that point they were better than the East. Simmons was also very good. I know that obviously the past handful of years for Ben Simmons have been pretty much non-existent, really. But if you had stock in him before, it's been incredibly disappointing. For the sake of he's not even playing anymore, there's clearly something going on sort of mentally with him ever since it seems like that Atlanta Hawks series that they lost a few years ago, and he passed up on the layup and passed it out to his teammate, and since then the media's been all over him. He hasn't been himself. So in this season though, in 17-18, Simmons was third in his team in scoring, so a lot of people were saying, well, Mitchell's the number one option on a more winning team than Ben Simmons is. It should go to him. And I know this isn't a perfect comparison because the Sixers were a 3 seed this year. I believe they still had 1 less games than the Jazz, but that was at least the season that I had heard of the winning argument in Rookie of the Year before, and Ben Simmons ended up winning it. So it did not come into effect there. I think that the Spurs are horrendous, and they've been a little unfairly taking up national TV slots. But if you actually sit down and watch these games and just power through the blowouts, you'll see Victor Wembanyama is incredible. And Chet Holmgren is really good too, but he's not as good as Wemby in my opinion. Wemby is averaging 20, 10, and 3 while leading the NBA in blocks per game with 3 point something. The defense is 8 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court versus off. This is a Spurs team that is not good on defense, and they are significantly worse when he is not on the court to sort of take on that defensive anchor. He's played most of the season without a true point guard. The Spurs were starting Jeremy Sohan for a lot of the season there, which never made sense to me. The fact that they never even really attempted to get a point guard in the offseason was disappointing in my books. But now that Trey Jones is in there, the offense looks a little more functional, and I think that Wemby is really coming to into his own as the season goes on. Even in some of these losses, the Joel Embiid 70-point game, Wemby had 30, and I was really surprised by, yes, Embiid had 30, but I had never seen a player be able to guard him in that mid-range area as effectively as he did. Now, Embiid got him on a couple possessions, but I think he has the framework to be great. And yes, he's definitely going to have to put on some muscle. Embiid, when he wanted to actually go inside on him, he was able to. But he's a rookie. He's 20 or so years old. He has time. Like I said, Chet's having a really nice season as well. Some advanced analytics don't really like him. The on-off differential shows that OKC is actually better when he is off the court. He has an expected -9 wins to Wembanyama's +5. Now, we don't need to get too caught up in these advanced analytics. The big thing is, if you swap their situations, would the Thunder be any worse? I don't think so. And I'm going with Wemby on this one. Sort of running out of time here, so we'll go a little bit more rapid fire on these final awards. Defensive Player of the Year, I have Rudy Gobert, the future Hall of Famer, and don't forget it, I know he gets a lot of slack as well, but he is a generational defender. He's the defensive anchor on the best defense in the league, and I think that he will be racking up another one of these Defensive Player of the Year awards to his collection already. Coach of the Year, sticking with the Timberwolves, I have Chris Finch, where I know that people were sort of killing the Timberwolves this week because of how poor the Cat 64-point performance ended in a loss was and all of that. But people were killing them even harder last year when the front office traded as much as they did for Rudy Gobert, and it looked like a disaster for a while. But they've been able to turn a corner. They've been much better this season. I think that Chris Finch deserves credit. Also, on the note of that loss to Charlotte where Cat had 64, there was no Mike Conley. Yes, it's probably a little concerning that not having that one leader, everything goes to a bad place for the Timberwolves there. But Chris Finch sort of got on his team in the post-game presser, held them accountable. I think from the perception is that his team responded, and they are looking to improve from there out. I think that OKC's Mark Daigneault, he also deserves some appreciation for this, but I have Finch as of right now. Most improved player, I have Tyrese Maxey. I typically don't love giving a player who just sort of takes on a bigger role. I think it's a little reductive, especially because if you watched Maxey last year, you knew he was a really good player, but he has improved some. Statistically, up 5.5 points, up 3 assists per game. Philly's offense is 13 points per 100 possessions better with him on the court. This is the 99th percentile for all guards, so that's impressive. There just aren't a ton of other candidates, I feel like, for this award. Kobe White maybe has a chance to steal this down the stretch, where he was playing much less last year, and he had earned his opportunities more so this year than a personnel change, and he has been great this year, started every game for the Heat. Finally, Sixth Man of the Year. This one was tough for me. It was between two players. I ultimately decided to go with Malik Monk. I think that he is a true bench guy, hasn't started a game for the Kings all season. He's averaging 15 and 5.5 on 44 and 39 splits. He's improved a ton as a playmaker, and I think that he really brings a lot of energy to that Kings team. Tim Hardaway Jr., I think, is having a very under-the-radar season, despite averaging the most points off the bench in the NBA this season. So he deserves some consideration as well. I have Monk in this case, but if you had Tim Hardaway Jr., I wouldn't argue too hard. So that is all we have time for today on the show. Thank you very much for tuning in. Remember to like and follow, and for future reference, if you ever want to help us out here as the show hosts, myself and my co-workers, remember to use streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip to help get your donations in, help get your questions the priority they deserve. So we will be back tomorrow, same time, 2 o'clock. Going to be doing some NFL Conference Championship preview. Really looking forward to it. So we will see you then.